It's working now. September 2nd, 1983. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Dr. Willard Holt. Dr. Holt, where were you born?
Originally from Olustee, about 12 miles southwest of here.
And when's your birthday?
June 11th, 1908.
1908. Who was your father?
My father's name was Dennis R. Holt.
Who was your mother?
My mother was Eva L. Orsherman, A-U-S-H-E-R-M-A-N-N.
Were your parents from Oklahoma?
No. My father was from Kansas, and my mother was from Maryland, a little town in Maryland called Burkittsville.
How come they came to Oklahoma?
That's a rather odd story. My mother was living in Springfield, Missouri, along about 1880, somewhere along there. I can't remember. And she had a year in college, what they called a normal school in those days. And she took a job teaching school out at Iowa, Kansas. And my father lived in Uniontown, Kansas. And they got to going together, and she wouldn't marry him till he had some property. He didn't have nothing. And he got in that land race when they opened the Cherokee Strip in '89 and got a quarter section of land. And then they got married, and they moved to Oklahoma. And my two sisters were born up there on that quarter section of land up close to a little town called Kildare, K County.
Okay.
My older sister was born in '98, and my younger sister was born in 1900. And I guess he got the wanderlust. They came out here in 1902 in a covered wagon from K County, Oklahoma. And I remember my father saying he didn't like the looks of Oklahoma City. He didn't like the looks of Lawton or Altus, so when he got to Olustee, that suited him just right. Why, I'll never know.
How long did it take to travel by wagon from Kildare to Olustee?
I don't remember. Of course, I wasn't born until 1908. They came here in 1902, but as I remember my mother saying it took something around 3 weeks or a little more. No roads, no nothing.
Did they talk much about the trip?
No, not much. They didn't talk much about it. As I remember, by the time I was old enough to remember anything, it was an old story.
Mm-hmm. What about your grandparents? Did you know them?
My grandfather was Judge Holt. He lived at Uniontown, Kansas, and he had a horse and buggy, I remember my father telling me. And every time he'd come in at night, Dad had to get out of bed to feed the horse. But he put himself up as a lawyer. In those days, along about 1870, 75 in there, you didn't have to, all you had was one law book. And that made a lawyer out of you. And he settled all the disputes up there in western Kansas for a number of years. My grandmother Holt, her name was Nancy Gent, G-H-E-N-T. And I believe she was Grandfather Holt's second wife. He had 7 children with the first wife and 4 with the second. My father was the second bunch. And I didn't know anything about the first wife till I was up in Dodge City, Kansas, when in 1935, and a real good-looking girl walked into my office, and she says, "I'm your cousin." And I looked at her, and she was pretty acceptable. She was nice looking. I says, "How come you're my cousin?" She says, "Well, your father was my grandfather's half-brother." And last year she drove through Altus and visited me here. She's living in Tucson, Arizona now.
Was your grandfather in the Civil War?
That I don't know. I don't think he was. That was my grandfather Holt.
Yeah.
I don't think he was, as near as I can remember. He lived in Kansas at the time, and our mother family lived in Missouri, in Springfield at the time. We migrated there from Maryland years and years ago.
What is your earliest memory of Olustee?
The earliest memory of Olustee that I can remember was when they had the fire on the north side of the street. I don't know just when that was, about 1913 or 14. I must have been about 6 years old. I remember Father went uptown that night to the fire, and Mother and my two sisters and myself watched it out the upstairs window, and that's about the first thing I can actually remember over there.
Can you describe what the town of Olustee looked like in your childhood?
Just a main street and a water tower, that's all.
Streets paved?
Oh, no, just when the car went down the street, it was pretty dusty.
Hey, were the buildings brick, wood?
Buildings were brick, all of them. It was quite a town. In 1925, when I graduated from high school, they had two dry goods stores, 3 grocery stores, 2 barber shops, 2 garages, 2 drug stores, a variety store, and we had a school that had about, I think it had about 500 or 600 children on it.
Who were the prominent people in Olustee at that time?
At that time? Well, the real old timers there were T.I. Truscott, who had a grocery store there, and when my father came there in 1902. And I can't remember who else was there at the time, but later on, John Edwards came there and established a bank. J.W. Edwards established a bank, and C.W. Edwards came and established an insurance office. And my father came there in 1902. He was, I guess you'd call him a prominent citizen. He ran a lumber yard there for a number of years. And in 1913, he bought a third interest in a dry goods store there. And had one with the name of Cecil Holt till 1915, I believe it was. And he bought Mr. Cecil out, and it was Holt's dry goods store that he sold out in 1925. And that's the year he sent me off to college.
What year did you start to school?
I started school in 1913. I was 5 years old. You could do that in those days, you know. And my mother was an old school teacher, and by the time I started school, I could read and write a little bit, and knew my numbers and everything, and I got off to a head start.
What was the name of the school?
Olustee.
Olustee?
Olustee grade school, then they had a high school there.
Remember your teacher's name?
Yep. She's still alive, by the way.
She is.
Her name was Ada Flutie, F-L-U-T-Y, and she lives in Norman, Oklahoma. She's 96, and she got married about 4 years ago. She's a brave woman, I'll tell you.
As a child, what kind of chores you do around the house?
Well, we had coal oil lamps, and a coal oil stove, and coal we heated with coal. And my job, the first thing I remember, was to always have kindling in the house to build a fire in the morning, fill the coal oil lamps, fill the coal oil stove, and bring in 2 kinds of water, well water and rainwater. Rainwater was to wash in, and the well water was to drink. We had an outdoor privy. I remember that very distinctly.
How large was your house?
Pardon?
How large was the house?
The house?
Yeah.
It had it had 4 rooms downstairs and 3 upstairs. And my 2 sisters slept in the south bedroom, and I slept in the east bedroom, and then there was a parlor. They had an upstairs parlor. Had a bookcase and stuff up there, as I remember. But the house was remodeled in 1917, I think, and moved over north about 12 feet because some of the trees had grown too big and they didn't want to sacrifice the trees. But
Can you, was there any effort or work for the war effort in Olustee in World War I?
was there any what?
Work for the war effort?
Oh, yeah, I remember.
1918.
I was 10 years old then, and I remember the women all sewing down at the Christian church and knitting, making what they call wristlets, I believe. That was because the Army bought the uniforms too short in the sleeves. They had to put wristlets there, and then they knitted scarves and made underwear and other things all the time down there. I remember the World War I quite well. I was in the 3rd and 4th grade.
What about Armistice Day?
Pardon?
Armistice Day.
Armistice Day in 1918, I was over here in Altus with my father. And the word spread around, and cars were just running around and around the square, shooting shotguns in the air. You never heard such a racket in your life. And nobody made any effort to stop them. That was Armistice Day 1918. We went back to Olustee, and it's quite peaceful over there.
Could you tell us some of the difference in attitudes in World War I? The general attitude of people as compared to, say, the Vietnam War and later wars that have come along?
Well, there are different kinds of wars. The World War I was, of course, now this is not what I thought at the time. It's my opinion now, more or less. World War I was the first war to save democracy. And they had a terrible time selling us on saving democracy in the Second World War, but they did. And then they got the same thing in the Vietnam War, and I think in the Korean War. Of course, as you know, the Vietnam War and the Korean War wasn't a bit popular. Neither one of them were. We had no trouble getting organized in World War II, however.
The 1920s. Were there many flappers in Olustee?
One or two.
What made them a flapper?
Well, let's see, I was about 12 or 13 years old. But mostly it was a short dress, low waist, and a bobbed hair, and a rather odd-looking hat shaped down over the ears, as I remember. And reputation, more or less.
What kind of reputation?
Well, it had to be rather popular. It was a good reputation, I don't think bad about it.
Who had the first car in Olustee?
I don't know for sure, but I think it was Dr. Crow. I believe it was a Maxwell, one-seated Maxwell. Tom Moore had the next one, and well, I don't know about that. But then Mr. Edwards, the banker, bought a Hudson. That was the biggest car I'd ever been in town.
What year was that?
I have no idea.
What was your first impression when you saw a car? What did you think?
I wanted to sit down in it. I just had a good time, just like a kid playing with a new toy.
Where'd you go to college?
You want the whole book?
The whole thing?
The whole ball of wax?
Yep.
I'll give you the whole ball of wax. I started school at Oklahoma University, and I went there 3 years. And then that following summer, I went to the University of Chicago,
What years?
1928. And then I enrolled in medical school at Northwestern University. And I graduated from medical school at Northwestern University in 1932. I interned down in New Orleans, and then at Kansas City. Later in 1939, I went back and took an extra year of internal medicine at the University of California in San Francisco.
OU, 1925.
Hmm?
Who was president of OU in 25?
William Bennett Bazell, he came up there from Texas A&M College. W.B. Bazell.
What was he like, Dr. Bazell?
Well, of course, I never had any dealings with him, but he was generally well liked, as I remember. He didn't give us much trouble. The only thing was, of course, in those days, you couldn't have an automobile. Nobody had an automobile. And you had dates for very, very, you had to be on at certain hours, and dances had to be over by 11, and if you get caught in an automobile, you were in trouble. And everybody got caught once or twice.
What did you study at OU? What was your major?
Pre-med.
Pre-med?
Took pre-medicine, you know. Chemistry and physics and German before I got in medical school.
Did you live on campus?
When?
Did you live on campus or off campus?
I lived in a fraternity house the first 2 years,
Which one?
Sigma Nu, and then I lived out in a private home with 2 other medics, first year in medical school.
What was life like in a fraternity house in 1925?
In 1925, well, there was a lot of hazing and a lot of horseplay.
Hazing. What's hazing?
Oh, you're so young you probably wouldn't remember. Well, if they caught you, when they had a football game, if they caught you with a date or even walking along with a girl, they'd run you through a paddle line 2 blocks long. Come up, ask you what's your name, and if you didn't know their name, they'd pat you till they told you. And sometimes they wanted to know who was the mayor of the city they lived in. Of course, you didn't know that, so they just kept patting you. But it was an interesting thing. I understand all that's a thing of the past now.
Of course, I've heard about the Roaring '20s and everything, and
Well, that is when they, the only liquor was moonshine, corn whiskey, and it was $4 a gallon, pretty cheap. I remember it was terrible, terrible. Everyone drank it and was very happy with it, and of course the real popular thing then was a pint silver-plated flask to carry in your coat pocket. Had a silver thing on it, and you drink out of the flask. If you didn't have one of those, you didn't amount to much, but I didn't have one.
who made the moonshine at that time? Do you know?
Oh, I could even give you the name of the fellow that made it out east of Norman at Rolls, Oklahoma. I believe his name was Rose.
Rose?
R-O-L-L-S. Out at a little place called Denver. We called it Denver Corn.
Denver Corn. And that's where all the students went to get the moonshine.
That's where we got the moonshine.
He charged $4 a gallon?
$4 a gallon. Of course, some of the more ingenious ones would buy 8-pint bottles and pour it in that and sell it to the rest of the fellows for $2 a pint. They were doing that in those days just like they do it now.
Mhm. Medical school at Northwestern. What was that like?
Well, Northwestern University in that day and time was, and today is an entirely different school like Oklahoma University. They were kind of hoity-toity up there and went by a lot of rules and standards that we didn't have at Oklahoma University. For example, they didn't want you to wear boots to school and things like that, and jackets. They preferred that you be in a suit of clothes. And it was on a much larger scale that the building was 13 stories high, or 14, and the building we had down at Norman was only 2 stories high. And of course, their teaching hospital was Cook County Hospital in Chicago that had 3,000 beds, and they had 4 or 5 other teaching hospitals. It's quite a big operation. And it wasn't any tougher, but the classes were bigger. The class had 125 in it. We only had 50, 56, Oklahoma University.
You went to Northwestern in 1928.
Mm-hmm.
So you finished up in 32 in the middle of the Depression.
Pardon?
You finished up in 1932 in the Depression at
32.
Northwestern. 32.
Started practice in 1932.
Did the Depression affect your college education at all at
Oh, I
Northwestern?
darn near starved to death for. I just existed from 1932 to 1942 till I went to the Army.
Mhm.
Some of the doctors that had been out 10, 15, 20 years were just having a hard time paying their office rent. There's plenty of business, but no money changed hands.
Yeah.
I think the bankers now call that cash flow, which we didn't have in those days.
Right. When did you first set up your practice?
I was up to work with my uncle in Wichita, Kansas. He paid me $200 a month. And I had a good job. The rest of the boys didn't have a job, were having a terrible time. They just couldn't hardly make it.
What'd you do with your uncle?
Pardon?
What'd you do with your uncle in Wichita?
I just worked with him as an associate.
Was he a
Internal
doctor?
medicine.
Okay, was he a doctor in
Oh
Wichita?
yeah, internal medicine.
What's his name?
Holt, Dr. Tom Holt. He'd been dead for years.
I understand you went to California.
Well, I went to Dodge City, Kansas for 2 years first. Went out there in June of 1934. I stayed there 3 years at Dodge City, right in the middle of all those dust storms.
What were the dust storms like?
Oh, they were terrible. Sometimes you couldn't see the radiator cap on the front of your car. It's hard to believe how bad they really were. In fact, when you try to tell somebody about it, they accuse you of being drunk and not remembering and saying it's worse than it is. But they were just as bad as people say. I've seen a cloud come in, 1,000 feet high, just roll in, and it'd be just black as night when it rolled over you. And the worst one they had was Sunday, April 14th, 1935. Everybody remembers that one. And it went on for 2 days, and people didn't get out of the house for 2 days.
How did you breathe in those dust storms?
A lot of people wore masks. Some people had handkerchiefs over their nose, and some didn't do anything. I didn't do anything particular. You had to blow your nose pretty often, and you'd blow out mud. And your clothes were fairly dirty. I ruined the car. The air filters on the cars in those days weren't as good as they are now. They didn't have the oil bath filter developed, as I remember. And I just like putting emery in your engine and just ruined the cylinders.
Did the dust storms cause dust pneumonia?
That was always a question. People had pneumonia before they had dust storms. some of the people who had emphysema and chronic lung disease got in trouble with the dust storm, but the healthy people like me or you, ordinarily didn't have any difficulties. But the ones that were ailing and infirm did have difficulties. Just like cold weather affects the older people more than it does the younger people.
Okay, and from Dodge City you went to
I went to
California?
Northern California, up in Feather River Valley, in first day of May, 1937. Set up practice in a little town out there called Gridley, right on the Feather River. It was between Marysville and Oroville. That's when all the Okies were out there.
Why'd you go to California?
Wanted to make a living. And I got awful tired of that dust and dirt in western Kansas. And I had a friend out there, and he wanted me to come out there, so I went out there. We worked together, but we weren't in any kind of partnership or anything like that.
Was he a doctor also?
He was a doctor, yeah. He was from Northwestern, the same class I was in. And I knew him quite well.
You mentioned that all the Okies were in California. Did you
Well,
get-
they called them Okies. The California people called them Okies. They were really a section of southeastern Oklahoma, southwestern Arkansas, and a portion of Missouri up there. That those people came out there. They were very poor class people. They probably weren't making a whole lot better living at home than they made out there. But they were certainly migrants and transits, and the government put them in these camps. They had them housed in pyramidal tents out in the peach orchards, mostly there to pick peaches. And they had the place policed pretty well, I remember. I don't remember what their sanitary facilities were, but I'm sure it must have been slip trenches. I don't know for sure. But I used to go out, they'd call me to go out and see them, and when you got there, they always had a peace officer that'd take you down to the tent to see them. Of course, no money ever changed hands. It just kind of and the local hospital, it was a small hospital, only 12 beds, and they never paid the hospital, they never paid the doctors. That was before the days of welfare and Medicare. They didn't have any, it was just tough if you took care of them. I've removed appendixes on them and delivered babies and everything you could think of. I'm never going to cry and dime for it. But the ones, the doctors today don't have that problem.
What were the camps like?
The camps, just like I say, they had these pyramidal tents.
What kind of tent is that?
That's an army tent that's square, about, I'd say it's 15 to 18 foot square, and comes up like a pyramid on 4 sides. It's a military tent. The Army still uses them.
How many of these tents would be in one camp?
I have no idea, but I do know that there would there'll be several hundred people in one camp. Anyway, several hundred. And because the peaches were over, they'd move up north, go up to Oregon and Washington to pick the apples and the other things, and hops.
So they were the original migrant workers.
They were the ones that, that's the group that John Steinbeck wrote about.
The Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah, that's the group that he wrote about, and some of them were pretty rugged, I'll tell you. Some of them were terrible.
What made them terrible? What made them bad? The camps.
Dirty. They were dirty. They were dirty, and they were uneducated, and they, well, did I say any more? That's about enough, I think.
Where'd you set up your practice? You said you went to the Feather River?
Feather River Valley, up north of Sacramento, in a town called Gridley, Gridley. Little town about 1,500 or 1,800.
Now, were your patients mainly the local people or the people in the camps or what?
Local people, that's the only one you could make a living off of. You couldn't make any living off the migratory people.
Okay. But you did doctor the migratory people? When,
Yeah,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun.
How long did you stay in California?
Pardon?
How long did you stay in California?
I stayed in that town a year, and then I went down to the University of California at San Francisco for postgraduate work for a year.
What did you study?
Internal medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back to Wichita, Kansas in 1939 and stayed up there for about 8 months or 9 months, and then moved down here to Altus in February 1940.
How come you came to Altus?
Well, I had a mother that was getting old over there and couldn't take care of her business, couldn't take care of herself. And my two sisters' husbands had businesses that they couldn't leave if they wanted to stay in business. Couldn't move them. And I figured I could make just as good a living here as I could any place else. So I come down and took care of my mother's business and looked after all the things that she did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did the downtown look pretty much like it does today?
No, the plan was exactly the same. The square and courthouse in the center. And the courthouse wasn't in too good a shape. Since World War II, they've redone that courthouse completely. It's a beautiful place now. But the square had 4 sides on it, and usual branches out, little businesses along the square, but none of the shopping centers were here. We got 4 shopping centers now. They didn't have any then. We had no motels.
Yeah.
One hotel on the corner of the square, the northeast corner of the square was there. And it did all the business, transient business. And it's since folded up, and they got a old folks home down there now, government project.
When did they put the Air Force Base in?
The Air Force Base came in about 1941 or 42. I remember I was in the Air Force myself, and I used to fly up here, and the Air Force Base was there in 43. And we'd fly up here from Texas and visit and then fly back the same day. They had 2-engine planes out there. I forget what they were, Curtiss, I think. I can't remember the number of them.
Pearl Harbor Day.
Pardon?
Pearl Harbor, December 7th. What were you doing?
I was here in Altus practicing medicine.
What was your first impression when you heard the Japanese bombed it?
Well, just like anybody else, I was amazed and couldn't hardly believe it. But that was 1941, wasn't it? I didn't get in until June of 42 or July of 42.
How come?
Pardon?
How come you didn't go in until 42, 43?
Well, the drug salesman had come to my office and they said they called on the doctors over at Fort Sill and said you had so many over there that didn't have anything to do with paint each other's throats. And said just stay out as long as you can. And I stayed out till they put me in class 1A. Then I got in fast.
Yeah.
But quick.
Were you a medic in the Army, a doctor?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you serve?
Well, I fought the Battle of Texas, and I was at San Antonio 2 or 3 times, and Ballinger and Tampa, and went back to Wilmington, Delaware, and Richmond, Virginia, Dover, Delaware, and finally got out of Mitchell Field, New York.
Where were you, is that where you were when the war ended?
I was in Tampa, Texas when the war ended, and I couldn't get out. They classified me as an internist, and they wanted internists to stay in. I wound up in this separation center in Richmond, Virginia. I thought we never would get out of there. But we had about 100 doctors there. The most men we ever separated in a day was, I think it was 150 or 200. We'd start right at 8 o'clock sharp, and we'd see how quick we could get them through. And the fastest we ever did, we ran 100 and come out through in about an hour and 10 minutes. Of course, we had 100 doctors to do it.
Was there a big celebration in Tampa when it ended?
No, not particularly, as I remember. I don't remember. I remember when they dropped I was in Tampa when they dropped the atomic bomb.
After World War II, what'd you do? Come back here to Altus?
Came back here to Altus and went to work. Been working ever since.
Yeah.
Except 7 years ago I quit. Retired, and since then I've just entertained myself. I'm a ham radio operator, and I got a Baldwin organ I've been learning to play. I did my yard work as long as I was physically able, and we traveled till Ms. Holt's health was bad. She can't travel anymore, and we have a few friends that get along real good. I'm very interested in Masonic work in the shrine, and I noticed that. And I got interested in the Scottish Rite and the shrine years ago. You know what the consistory is up at Guthrie?
Right.
You remember that?
No. I'm just Blue Lodge.
Hmm?
I'm just Blue Lodge.
Yeah. Well, you're going to go up to Guthrie and be a member. I'll take your petition. I was on the board up there for 18 years. And finally got my red cap and then my white cap. You know what the white cap is?
No.
33rd.
Okay. Oh, 33rd.
Then I was in the shrine for a number of years. And
What did you do to get your 33rd?
to get your 33rd?
Because I know it's strictly, you have to,
It's honorary.
yeah, right.
First you have to be a 32nd. You can pay your way up to the 32nd.
Yeah.
You buy it, 32nd. And after that, you have to work at least a minimum of 4 years for what they call a red cap, or a Knight Commander of the Court of Honor. And then if you keep working, and there's not too many guys ahead of you, you're eligible in another 6 years for a white cap, or 33rd. And both of them are honorary degrees. And if you ask for them, they'll never give it to you. You just have to wait and see your time. And they, each year out of 14,000 members, they take about 7 or 8, make 7 or 8 33rds, and about 35 or 40 red caps, which is Knight Commander of the Court of Honor. I still do some work in the Blue Lodge, and
What were some of your most interesting cases in you as being a doctor?
hundreds of them. That's something that you could talk about for years and years with the, I think the most interesting thing are the funny things that happen to you. And you have some very, very odd things happen to you.
Yeah, what are a few of them?
Oh, it's kind of hard to recall. 40 some odd years, 45 years experience, but one of the funniest was, I think, that happened. We had a girl come in Wichita, Kansas, and, well, she was sick. And what I mean, looked like she wasn't going to get well. Lost weight, ran fever. We ran every test we knew in those days. This was about 1933. We didn't have all the lab work that we have now. And everything was normal in the tests. We couldn't find anything wrong, and I just didn't know what was the matter with it. And I was with my uncle at the time, and he was what they call a board internist. All of a sudden, one day after about 3 weeks, her fever broke, and she started to get well. She started to eat, and pretty soon she was up walking around the room, gaining weight. And she's ready to go home. When she got ready to leave, she looked up my uncle. She says, "What in the world was the matter with me?" And he went over and put his arm around her. And he says, "Honey," he said, "I haven't the slightest idea." I remember that. I remember that experience. It taught me a good lesson.
Yeah.
Didn't have the slightest idea.
What's your favorite childhood memory?
Pardon?
What's your favorite childhood memory?
I think my favorite childhood memory is when I was 11 years old. My father was in the dry goods business, and he went to market in St. Louis twice a year. And while he could still take me on half fare, he took me up to St. Louis, and I stayed in a big hotel and rode the streetcars. And I remember he took me down to Denny Moore's place, and he and these other fellows had beer. But I was 11 years old, so they got me a strawberry soda. But I came home and told the kids that I'd been in Denny Moore's bar in St. Louis, Missouri. Big deal, I'll tell you. I lorded it over them.
Are you familiar with the old Spanish mine out by Olustee?
No, I'm not. Didn't know there was one.
There's an old Spanish copper mine out there. You know where the copper mine is, out by Olustee?
Yeah.
That's what the old Spanish mine was.
Is it right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I wasn't familiar. I was familiar with Creta, Oklahoma, and they had a lake over there, Creta Lake, where the railroad took on water when they had coal and steam, and they had that lake and they took on water. But I wasn't familiar with the copper mine.
Let me see.
I remember when I was a kid, on Sunday, every kid in town was down to the depot to see the train come in. Everybody down there, some of the adults too. And see that steam engine coming in and pulling 5 or 6 passenger cars. You wouldn't believe it, but they used to have, through Altus here, they used to have 4 trains a day on the Frisco, passenger trains, 2 going west and 2 going east. And I think they had the same number on the Katy, and then the same number on what they call the Orient in those days, Chicago Orient Pacific, and now the Santa Fe. Comes out from Wichita, Kansas, going on down to San Angelo, Texas. They used to have about 12 passenger trains a day coming through here in 1925.
How many trains came through Olustee?
4,
4.
2 east and 2 west.
When did the train come to Olustee? When did they build the track?
They built that track about 1903, I think.
1903.
I'm not sure, but they have that information here in the museum, but I believe it was 1903. They built it on from Altus to Olustee to El Dorado. Oklahoma City and Tulsa, I was completely lost.
Is this at OU?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a terrific amount of adjusting to do. And, but I adjusted and got along fine.
Did you have a raccoon coat?
Pardon?
Did you have a raccoon coat in the 20s?
Did I ever what?
Have a raccoon coat?
Oh, no, some of the boys did, though. That was just about a year or 2 before my time. In the 1920s to 1924 was a raccoon coat. In fact, when I went to Chicago in 1928, one of the first shows that I saw was the musical Good News. You ever hear of it?
No?
And before Drunks came out, all of them had raccoon coats on. It was a college show. And they sang a song that went like this: after commencement, what are we going to commence? 4 years of college have left us without any sense. We know Latin and Greek, 'tis true, but who in the hell are we going to talk to? So after commencement, what are we going to commence? That's one of the songs of the show.
It's called Good News?
Yeah. Another song in it was The Best Things in Life Are Free. You might have heard of that.
Yeah.
And the other one was Mr. Good News. It was I had quite a time when I went to Chicago, a little town, Olustee. Got to see Helen Hayes and burlesque. They had 3 burlesque houses in Chicago: the Haymarket, the Star and the Garter, and the Rialto. And that's not only just.
Yeah. Want me to shut it off?
No, it's all right. It's quite a show to see a burlesque show.
Mm-hmm.
First time I'd ever seen a striptease.
Was Helen Hayes in burlesque?
Oh no, Helen Hayes was in a play called Coquette.
Coquette.
It was a stage show.
Yeah.
She was strictly first class.
Okay.
Always has been.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I didn't think she was ever in burlesque.
Oh no, she wasn't.
Well,
John Hutchison still in Bartlesville.
I don't know the name.
You ought to know him. And Keller. W.W. Keller were the 2 hosts, I think, but Bud Adams.
Yeah, Keeter.
Keeler, yeah.
Yeah.
Adams is dead now.
Yeah.
He married the old man Wade Phillips' daughter. That's how he got in there. Boots did.
Oh, let me see. Well, I think we have a good interview.
Okay.
Anything we left out?
No.
Oh, I was going to ask about the labor camps in California. How were they organized? The internal structure?
I have no idea. They had supervisors and police control that had uniformed men there that took care. I know they'd always give me an escort when I went in to see somebody. And I think they were under the supervision of the federal government, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, the uniformed people, were they federal officers or state?
I think they were local.
Local?
Just wore badges, I remember, and they didn't have a uniform. But,
You've seen the movie The Grapes of Wrath, haven't you?
yeah.
Was that pretty similar to where the camp life was set up, the way that would be portrayed?
It was a little it was kind of like it, yeah. It is overstretched quite a bit.
Yeah,
That's just like all things in the movies are.
Yeah. Probably life was pretty routine.
Well, isn't it everywhere?
That's true. That's true.
If you study psychology, I've got a son-in-law who's a PhD, professor of psychology and chairman of the department at Emporia State University in Emporia, Kansas. He's the nicest guy you ever saw, and one of the smartest kids I've ever known in my life. He's 42 or 3, and he makes a good living for my daughter, and nice to her, and nice to my granddaughter. But the poor rascal has absolutely no sense of humor. It's just not there. You crack a good one, it just goes completely over his head. He's thinking something else. My daughter's got her master's degree this summer, and is teaching at Emporia State University herself.
Yeah.
And they got a boy 40 years old. He's in air conditioning. Has charge of all the Subaru account for air conditioners for Lone Star Manufacturing Company. And he's responsible for everything between them and Subaru. He's doing well.
I was gonna ask, did your father ever have a farm at one time?
Pardon?
Your father ever have a farm?
My father?
Yeah.
He farmed when he got that quarter section claim and he opened up the Cherokee Strip
Yeah.
in '89. He farmed there from '89 till 1902 when he came down here 3 years. And he came down and he bought farms, and he owned farms over there. He owned, let's see, he had about 4 quarter sections over there when he died, but he never operated any farms over here. He was all,
Did you ever work on a farm?
me?
Yeah.
When my father introduced me to hoe handle and cotton sack, he didn't have any trouble getting me to go to medical school.
So you chop cotton
Oh,
and
yeah,
pick cotton?
chop cotton, pick cotton. I didn't like it. That's, boy, I was allergic to all that.
Yep. How much cotton could you pick in a day?
Well, they pull bowls. A good cotton picker could pull 400. If I got 100, I was lucky. I just wasn't adapted to it. In fact, my heart wasn't in it. But I was raised in that country dry goods store over there, and my dad taught me to keep a set of books, wait on people, open the store, sweep the damn thing out. Everything you could think of I had to do. I guess it's good for me. We, Miss Holt and I, our 2 children are adopted, and our granddaughter's adopted. She's almost 14 years old.
Well, Dr. Holt, I want to thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.